Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daisy. For today's video, I will be reading my subscribers' spooky stories. So if you're interested, grab your snacks, grab your cobija, and let's get straight into it. Hi Daisy, my name is Beatrice, and this is my story that happened to me when I lived with my grandmother when I was a teenager. So living at my grandparents' home was obviously my grandparents, my cousin Alex, my uncle Tony, and myself. Alex and her uncle Tony were close in age and would always go out together. Since my grandparents were very protective of me, I would always stay in and wasn't allowed to go out a lot. On this particular night, it was a Saturday night. Alex was staying over at a friend's house and was not coming home until the next morning. My uncle Tony was hanging out with his friends down the street, and my grandparents went off to bed. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was still awake, just watching TV in my room, when I received a call from my uncle Tony that he was coming home to eat. He would usually call me so I could unlock the front door. I let him in and ended up eating together, nothing out of the ordinary. When we finished eating, he told me to go outside with him so I can lock the front gate as he leaves. So I did just that. I walked him outside and locked the front gate behind him. I stood on our porch as I saw him walk all the way down the street until I couldn't see him anymore. I walked back inside, locked the front door, and walked into my room and locked it as well. As soon as I was going to sit down on my bed, my doorknob started rattling as if someone was trying to come inside, but couldn't since it was locked. At first, I didn't think anything, and my first instinct was to open and let whoever was trying to come in. But then I stopped myself, stood by the door, and said, "Ama? Apa? Mom? Dad?" The rattling stopped. No one answered. Again, I didn't think much of it, and since no one answered and the rattling stopped, I went to go back to bed. But as soon as I was going to lay in bed, the rattling began again. This time it was harder, like someone or something was trying hard to get in. I stood up and asked, "¿Quién es? Who is it?" Again, no one answered. My grandparents owned this house since before I was born, so this house was always my comfort place. I always felt safe. Nothing paranormal ever happened, so that's why I didn't feel scared on this night. I was just confused about what was going on. The rattling continued, and I was getting a little nervous as I was calling out to whoever was on the other side of the door. I managed to gather up courage to open it and check to see who it was, but when I did, no one was there. I even walked down the hallway and peeked into my grandparents' room to see if they were sleeping, and they were sound asleep. I walked to Alex's room to see if maybe he had come home early, but he wasn't there. Then I checked my uncle's room, and he wasn't there either. So I just went back to bed. I was more confused than scared at this point. The next morning, I told my grandmother what happened, and she was surprisingly not surprised and just told me to pray before bed and to let her know if I see or hear something else out of the ordinary. So days passed before my next incident. We had some family come over during the day. I was hanging out with two of my girl cousins in my room when I heard my metal blinds behind my TV move. It sounded like someone ran their finger through them. My cousins also heard it and looked in that direction and actually saw the metal blinds moving. Since my TV was in front of my blinds, I could only see part of the blinds. I stood up and noticed that it was a big snake slithering between my blinds. We all ran out and told my grandmother. Like the baddie she was, she grabbed it with her bare hands and threw it outside and started hitting it with a shovel while cursing at it. At this time, I still didn't think much of it. Animals and critters sometimes come inside, right? Well, the next incident, I was outside and I happened to walk past my window and I came across a dead crow bird with no head directly under my window. I panicked and picked it up by the tail feather and chucked it across the fence into my neighbor's home. I quickly went to tell my grandmother. She ran outside and asked to see it. I can tell she was starting to get irritated at these little incidents that were happening to me. I told her I threw it across the fence. She got more upset when she realized I had touched it. She told me to wait in the house as she went to go talk to the neighbor. My grandma came back about 15 minutes later and washed my hands with holy water as she prayed. She warned me not to touch anything again. Later that day, I was taking a nap in my bed, and I was suddenly awakened by someone jumping on the bed. I thought it was my cousin Alex. Upset, I woke up and told him to stop. When I realized it wasn't him, I laid back down and closed my eyes. When it happened again, but this time, I was awake and knew for a fact it wasn't anybody. This is the first time I felt fear. Nothing happened for a few days until one day. My grandparents had some workers in the backyard cutting down a tree. My grandmother asked me to make them some lemonade and put it in the refrigerator so they can have something cool to drink since it was so hot that day. I did just that and put the lemonade in the freezer so it could get cold faster. About an hour or so later, I went to prepare some cups with ice and went to take out the container with lemonade. And I kid you not, estaba lleno de gusanos. It was filled with worms, like big ones. Of course, I ran to show my grandmother, and that was the last straw for her. She said out loud, "Quien nos está haciendo esto, me las va a pagar." Whoever is doing this to us is going to pay. For a few days after that, some food would randomly show at our doorstep after we would come home from running errands. They were all my favorite foods, and I couldn't wait to eat them. But of course, my grandmother didn't even let that food enter our home. She would take a bag and throw away the food in the dumpster. Since our neighbors were older people like my grandparents, they would always take us food, and my grandmother would do the same. So I didn't see the random food showing up at our door unusual. After those incidents, nothing ever really happened again. Now as an adult, I remember talking to my grandmother about those incidents. She stated that someone le quería hacer un mal a ella, but being that she had a very strong personality and hard to bring down, the evil they wanted to do to her would affect me instead, because I was vulnerable and innocent at the time. She said all it took was some phone calls to Mexico. Our family still owns the house, even after my grandparents have passed, and it still remains a safe place for us and for my children as well, and nothing has ever happened since then. Dear Daisy, I was currently working in a phone store when I encountered one of the ugliest entities I'd have ever seen. That's saying a lot coming from a person who has a gift to see many things. I've been able to see entities, have dreams of the future, visions, and feel things when I touch people since the age of 5 years old. This story starts at the job I was working at about a year ago. It was a small phone store with only one bag storage room and bathroom. My 2 coworkers and I felt uncomfortable at the store, an agonizing feeling of constantly being watched no matter where we sat. In the back room, there was a small table where we had lunch and meetings. As we usually sat there waiting for customers to come in, we could hear footsteps coming towards us. I can recall getting up many times to check if someone arrived, but the front would be completely empty. It also didn't take long for my 2 other coworkers and I to realize how weary and tired we got the more time we spent in the back of the store. It was a bit shocking as well to hear how we could all relate in more than one way. One of them mentioned smelling a cologne on various occasions, and I had a feeling it was a male presence. We prayed a few times, but it's as if that wasn't enough. At the time, we were experiencing a high level of robberies. We would walk into a broken door and stolen cash every other day, but no one else around us seemed to be having such an issue. After some time, we decided to tell the owners, who happened to be Christians, about what we were experiencing in the store. Two of the owners took some time to come pray over the store, and things actually seemed to start looking better. The robbery slowed down, and over time, the place no longer felt heavy and oppressive. We no longer felt like we were being watched or that our energy was draining. As everything at work started to get better, things at home started to feel a bit strange. Everything I used to feel at work, I all of a sudden caught myself feeling at home. I found myself feeling on edge, as if I was being watched. My house felt darker than usual and not as warm or clean. One evening, as I was walking out of the living room into the kitchen, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was what looked like an inhumanly strange, huge hand coming from the edge of the door to my room, placing itself on the wall. The hand was pale and wrinkly, like it was wet, with really dark shading on the knuckles. The fingers were about 14 inches long, plus the 9-inch fingernails. It was by far the scariest thing I had ever seen. In shock, I looked away for a second, and as I looked back, I could see it slowly creeping its way back into my room. With chills all over my body and fear I hadn't experienced in what felt like ages ago, I knew I had to be brave for my son, who was sitting down in the living room. So I went inside the room and started praying over the house. Over the next 2 weeks, I felt it creeping around my house, to the point I would rather be in my room when I was home alone. Most days, I would rather close the door the whole way, but out of the one time of the few times that I left it slightly ajar, I could hear something was there. As I approached the door slowly, because the evil presence was so intense, I slowly closed the door and saw it. It felt very upset. It was like growling at me. I looked up and saw the face that resembled the hand I had seen 2 weeks earlier. It was so pale, wrinkly, and had many dark spots around the eyes, mouth, nose, eyebrows. Instead of getting super scared, I got upset, as this was my home and as a believer in Christ. I did my best to ignore it and not be disrespectful, but now it was doing everything in its power to take my peace. I started praying over my home and asked for it to leave in the name of Jesus Christ, for it to go back where it belonged. After that, I never felt or saw it again. I'm a huge believer that my patience and my faith in God helped me get this evil thing out of my home. I am thankful to the Lord for always watching over me and guiding me as I learned to live with all kinds of different dons that not many seem to have. Hi Daisy, my name is Giselle. It all started when my husband, my 3 daughters, and I moved into the house next door to my suegro's house. After about a month of being there, my oldest daughter, who was 1 at the time, started having really bad nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and crying. It would take up to 5 minutes to calm her down so we could put her back to sleep. After her nightmares started, we also started hearing things around the house, but just shrugged it off. My husband would say, "La casa está vieja, por eso se escuchan esos ruidos." The house is old, so that's why there's noises. Fast forward about 5 months of living there, my parents came to visit our daughters. Once they were ready to leave, my mom wanted to take my twin daughters to spend the weekend with her, and I agreed as I needed a break. So I ran upstairs to get something out of my room, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone in the girls' playroom. I quickly got what I needed from my room, and I looked back into the playroom to make sure there wasn't anyone in there. And that's when I saw an old woman standing in there, wearing a black dress. I stood in shock, and the woman just stared directly at me. I got scared and ran back downstairs. I didn't mention anything to my parents because they don't believe in the supernatural, and I didn't want them thinking I've gone crazy, but I never saw her again after that. Now, fast forward a year into living in the house. More things started happening with my daughter. She sees things and gets scared, saying, "Es el cucuy," and she starts crying. Then something unforgettable happened. I woke up very early one morning to run some errands. My husband and daughter stayed sleeping. Once I got home, I saw a very creepy man standing in front of the front window inside of my house. I froze. I texted my cuñada, my sister-in-law, who lives in the house with us, but she didn't text back. Then I called my husband a bunch of times, but he didn't answer, all while the creepy man was still standing there, but this time with a sinister smile on his face. I started getting scared, thinking there was really someone in my house. I looked at the window again, and the man started waving at me. I got out of the truck, about to run to my suegro's house and call the police, but the man suddenly disappeared. I decided to be brave and go into the house. I took the heaviest thing I had, which was 2 gallons of milk, and I was planning on throwing it at the man if I saw him. I entered the house, and I saw no one. I heard nothing. I walked in the kitchen, and there was no one. I put the milks down and grabbed a big knife and checked the room and the bathroom on the main floor. Then I sprinted up the stairs and ran straight to my room where my husband and daughters were sleeping. I woke my husband up in tears, telling him what happened. He called his sister, and she said she was sleeping, and there was no one in the basement except her. Later that day, my husband had to leave for work, and he said if anything happens again, to just leave and drive to my parents' house and stay there for the day. Nighttime came, and my twin daughters were sleeping, and my oldest was happily playing, until I heard her start screaming and crying. I ran to pick her up, and she kept pointing towards the bathroom door, saying, "¿Quién es él? ¿Quién es él? Who is he? Who is he?" After this happened, for weeks, I couldn't sleep at night, and I would always hear footsteps above us. It's been months since that happened, and just 2 days ago, I heard someone knocking on the window where I saw that man, this time from the outside, but there was no one there. Hey girlie, my name is Areli. When I was little, maybe 3 or at most 4 years old, my parents got a gift from one of their friends. It was a toy doll that could speak like any other battery-operated doll. My parents gave it to me not thinking much of it because it didn't give off any spooky vibes. It seemed like any other doll. Me being little, I don't remember the doll at all, but my parents say I loved playing with it. They said I would often talk to the doll and laugh with the doll and take it everywhere I went. I would cry if they tried taking it away from me, so they ended up just giving up and allowed me to play with it. My parents thought my obsession wouldn't last long. After more weeks passed, I stopped using all my other stuffed animals and all my other toys and kept insisting on playing with that specific doll. More time passed, and as many battery-operated toys, the batteries die. But it seemed like this doll's battery never died, and it was becoming suspicious to my parents. Eventually, my mom kept getting up at random hours of the night due to having nightmares of this doll. She was dreaming of a doll crying or whining or even calling out words it couldn't have known, like my name or my parents' names. After every nightmare, the doll's voice sounded more and more distorted, and it sounded closer and closer. Soon, my dad began to have nightmares as well. They didn't say anything at first because they thought it was only a nightmare. After several nights of having nightmares, my mom eventually told my dad while waking up during one of the nightmares. She told my dad, "Viejo, tuve una pesadilla de la muñeca." I had a nightmare of our daughter's doll. He said, "Yo pensé que nomás era yo que tenía pesadillas de esa muñeca." I thought I was the only one having nightmares of that doll. And not even 3 seconds after they had said that, the doll turned on. Keep in mind, I was sleeping since it was like 3, 4 in the morning, so there was no way I was playing with it. The doll was near my bed, but she was laying in the middle of my bedside table. They say as soon as they heard it turn on, they heard a loud thump. They weren't sure what to do, but they decided to check up on me. Sure enough, I was asleep, and the doll was laying on my floor. I've been a very light sleeper since I was little, so not even being fazed by the doll falling worried my parents. The doll's head turned towards my parents, and it kept singing and playing music, sounding very distorted. This freaked them out, and they took out the batteries, which they thought would solve the problem. But it kept singing. At this point, my dad got frustrated because now my mom was freaking out even more. So he took the doll to our backyard saying, "Ya cállate, shut up already," and threw the doll outside. The next morning, they took the doll and threw it in the trash. When I woke up, it seemed like I was no longer in a trance over the doll. They noticed that I acted normal. I played with all my other toys and wasn't even crying like I did before when I didn't have the doll. During breakfast, a couple days after throwing it away, they wanted to ask if I missed the doll. To which I responded, "¿Cuál muñeca, mami? Which doll, mom?" To say my mom was terrified is an understatement. She asked me, "La muñeca que canta, ¿no te acuerdas? The doll that sings, you don't remember?" I responded, "No, mami, no sé cuál. No, mom, I don't know which one." They decided to just leave it at that. My parents also noticed that as soon as the doll was out of our house, their nightmares about the doll also stopped. So they decided to never talk about it again. That is until I was older when my cousins and I were talking about some scary stories, and that's when they told us about the doll. So that was it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories as much as I did. If you have a spooky story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to send it in at daicyspooks@gmail.com. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye!